So welcome. We're going to do two things tonight. We're going to wrap up our earlier session where we're talking about the divine feminine. And we're going to then do one new thing. So
as usual, it's just spin a gloss.
Right.
We've far from exhausted the subject.
So here we go. Here's this, and how do I get to slideshow? Here we go. So we're going to talk about a group called the Cathars that were in the 1100s, 1200s in south central France. So you can see on the map, they're just west of the Côte d'Azur and just north of the Pyrenees. And this is called Languedoc, this region of France. The reason why we're talking about the Cathars is they really had many female priests or priestesses, and just shows you what happens when you do this. So the Cathars were a medieval religious sect, and they flourished, and this is their problem. They were over time, very affluent. They had a lot of money, and they themselves shared the money so that pretty much everyone did fine. The Cathar priests, which were primarily women, lived very simply, and they always regarded men and women as equals. So the beliefs, as we'll see, came out of Manichaeism, and there was also another activity over in Bulgaria called Bogomils. Bogo is God, and Mills is I don't know what, but they blended this Manichaeism with Christianity. So what did they believe? They believed that Satan had tricked a number of angels into falling from heaven, and then Satan encased them in bodies. And so the purpose of life was to, hold on one sec. We're just getting Barbara on. So
hello, Stephen, by the way. And hi, Barbara.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
We're
Good
just
evening.
filtering in.
we just started. We're
Okay.
dealing with the Cathars that are in the south region of France and
Back
Languedoc.
up a little bit.
Here,
Thank you.
hold on.
We just started. Do you know if Cheryl will be joining us?
I haven't, we are now in Virginia. We were with my daughter's family for Christmas in North Carolina and thought we'd swim by Williamsburg for a while. So no, I have not heard from her.
Okay.
Yeah, she went out over to see family, and she said she was flying back today, so we may or may not get her.
Okay.
So here on the map, you can see where the Cathars were in this region of France. Why doesn't this work? The main thing about their beliefs was they believed that Satan had tricked a number of angels into leaving or falling from heaven, and encased these angels in bodies. So the purpose of life was to renounce the pleasures and enticements of the world, and through repeated incarnations, you made your way back to heaven. So in this regard, there's a hierarchy in the Cathar world. There are these perfecti, those who renounce the world, which are the priests and the bishops. There are the credentes, or the believers, who still interacted with the world but worked toward renunciation of the world. Then finally, there were sympathizers who were the non-believers who aided and supported the Cathar communities. So the Cathars rejected the teachings of the Catholic Church as immoral, and they criticized the church for its hypocrisy, greed, and the lechery of its clergy. And the Catholic Church had acquired huge amount of land and wealth in Europe. It actually was the largest and richest entity in Western Europe all through the Middle Ages.
And it
And-
still is
Yeah.
in the world.
And so, not surprisingly, the Catholic Church didn't like this. And as we'll see, the Catholic Church teamed up with the King of France. Both the Catholic Church and the King of France wanted all the money that the Cathars had. And so they ended up creating the first crusade. There was no crusade prior to this. It took 20 years, started in 1209 and ended in 1229. And the main town in this region of France is called Albigensian. So it's the Albigensian Crusade, the one that took out the chief town. One other little thing that the Catholic Church cooked up for this was they created an institution called the Inquisition, which is still there today. And the Inquisition would go determine who are the true believers in Christ and who are not. So the Inquisition wrote the book on how to interrogate. No one has improved on it ever. The Nazis, the Soviets, the Red Chinese, nobody has come close to beating what the Inquisition did. So the basic problem is the Catholic Church massacred all of the Cathars. So the only people that were left were people that were not really Cathars. As we saw, they're called heretics, and they made it through the Inquisition. And so very little is actually known about the Cathars as a result of this. But as we said, the beliefs seem to have come out of the Middle East somewhere with its Manichaeism and combined that with Christianity. So the Catholic Church had the view that there was one God with three aspects: a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost. But this was really not the real vision of early Christianity. And it was only after the Council of Nicaea in 325 that this became the accepted view. And even then, the Nicene interpretation of Christianity vied with others like the Manichaeism view for centuries. And there were groups springing up all the time that were doing battle with the Catholic Church. The Cathars were probably the first significant one that really was a legitimate alternative to Catholicism. So what did the Cathars believe? This is a background. They believed in the feminine principle of the divine, that God was both male and female, and that the female aspect of God was Sophia, which is wisdom. This belief encouraged the equality of sexes in the Cathar communities. In the Middle Ages, it was in Catholic regions, it was very patriarchal. There was the notion of reincarnation, which they called metempsychosis. So soul would be continually reborn until it renounced the world completely and decided not to incarnate again. And there was a cosmic duality, the existence of two powerful deities in the universe, one good and one evil, who were in a constant state of war. And the purpose of life was to serve the good by serving others and escape from the cycle of rebirth and death to return home to God. So very different than the Catholic view. Now what?
Bart, I want to
Yeah.
But just for a second, I was listening to Joseph Campbell again this week, and the whole thing about duality, the positive and negative, he's talking about this island. I think it's one of the Greek islands where there's this huge sculpture. It's in the dark, and you walk in and you can't, out of the bright sunlight, you can't see anything. You keep walking slowly, you see this huge, like 19-foot tall sculpture in the center, and then there's smaller ones to the right and the left. This represents the mask of God. And then to the right and your left, you have the male and the female. And the message is, as soon as you leave the transcendent, you're in the world of duality. And it just really got my attention after the discussion we had last week.
Great. Thank you very much. So here's some more things about the Cathars. They believed in vegetarianism. It was okay for the credentes and the sympathizers to eat fish, for example, but the priests and priestesses were vegetarians. They were celibate. The perfecti, the priests and priestesses, were generally celibate, but it was simply thought, because of their view, that everyone who was born was just another poor soul trapped by the devil in a body. And so marriage actually was discouraged. The dignity of manual labor, the Cathars all worked, the priests as well as the lay people, and many were weavers. And the notion of suicide, or the ritual of endure, is what they called it, was actually viewed as a rational and dignified response under certain conditions. So these are very different beliefs than what Catholicism was teaching. The only books in the New Testament that they accepted were the Gospels. They rejected the epistles of Paul and the others, and they had particular emphasis on the Gospel according to John. So their central religious text was the Book of Two Principles, and the passages of this would be read by one of the perfecti to the congregation, and then another member, either of the congregation or the other perfecti, would interpret this. So that was their notion of having a service. And the Book of Two Principles related, among other aspects of the faith, the dual nature of life, how humans, once divine spirits of light, came to be bound in corruptible mortal flesh. So it's interesting how, if they thought reading the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, how they could even deal with this, but that's what they did. There's just some more background on this, what's in this Book of Two Principles. So that, again, Satan, or the devil, came to the gates of heaven and requested entry and was denied. So he waited outside for a while, 1,000 years, and one day saw the opportunity to sneak in, and he took advantage of this and got up. An audience of divine spirits told them they were losing out by continuing to love and serve God, who never gave them anything. They were literally little more than slaves, he said. And since God owned everything, they thought they had. They owned nothing. So if they would follow Satan, however, and leave heaven, he provided them with all kinds of pleasures, such as lovely vineyards, rich fields, beautiful women, handsome men, wonderful riches, and of course, the best wine. So that was what the story was. And so for 9 days and 9 nights, many souls were seduced by Satan, and they fell through this hole in heaven that Satan, the devil, had created. And God allowed this for those who wished to leave, but then he ended up sealing the hole. So after the souls had fallen out of heaven, they found themselves in the realm of the devil, and they didn't have anything. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Just mute. They where are we? Yeah, so they didn't have anything whatsoever. They remembered how wonderful it was in heaven. So they repented and they asked Satan, the devil, if they could return. And surprise, surprise, Satan replied they could not, because he'd fashioned for them bodies which would bind them to the earth and cause them to forget all about heaven. So the problem was that the devil had made the bodies easily enough, but could not manage to attach the souls to them so that they would think and feel and move. So Satan turned around and asked God for help, and God understood that the souls who had fallen would have to work their way back to his grace, and they could do so through struggling with these bodies. So he made a deal with the devil. The devil could do as he liked with the bodies, but the souls which animated them belonged to God. And that was the deal. The devil consented to this, and human beings were born. Now, you're trapped in these bodies, and the soul would live, die, and then be reborn in another body, as long as that soul remained attached to the body and the pleasures which the devil had promised it back in heaven. But once the soul renounced the body and all of its temptations, it would be free to return to God and be just like it formerly was. So the whole purpose of human existence was the struggle against the devil, known as Rex Mundi, Rex, King, Mundi, world, king of the world, king of this world, and the prison of the flesh. To put it mildly, this view contrasted sharply with the Catholic Church's vision of a Garden of Eden, in which woman, in the form of Eve, had caused humanity's fall by seducing Adam into eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and of humanity's later redemption from sin through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the single, all-powerful male God. So suicide was and is still considered a serious sin of the Catholic Church. Marriage is encouraged, reincarnation is rejected, and as is the concept of duality. So in Catharism, God and the devil are two eternal, uncreated forces of equal power. In Christianity, the devil is a fallen angel created by God and ultimately subordinate to him. So huge conflicts here. The Cathars insisted that Jesus had never been born of a woman, had been made flesh. He never suffered and died, and therefore was never resurrected. And all these events were told in gospel narratives, happened ideally as a sort of allegory for the state of the soul, which is born into the world trapped in a body that must suffer and die, and will finally be free only after it's mastered the body and renounced the things of this world. So the Cathars repudiated the symbol of the cross, of the Catholic Church's cross, and any sort of literal reading of any of the biblical books. They considered the cross a symbol of the king of the world and believed that it should be destroyed when encountered, as it was a representation of evil. And they claimed the cross was nothing more than a symbol of worldly power. All the sacraments of the church, including infant baptism and communion, were likewise rejected. The Cathars, who were not celibate, practiced birth control and abortion. They believed sex was a natural aspect of the human condition and could be engaged in for pleasure, but not only for procreation. And in fact, procreation was discouraged. And women were valued as men's equal. Female figures from the Bible were highlighted, especially Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary. So some scholars have suggested, in fact, that the growth of the cult of Virgin Mary in medieval Europe, which became an increasingly popular and influential movement, was encouraged by the Cathars' elevation of womanhood. But remember, all the Cathars got slaughtered, so we don't know. So the Cathars lived in small communities from 60 to 600 And they shared all their possessions. They took care of each other as one family. And they gained a very strong foothold in southern France. There was also some in Italy. And it was very appealing to the peasants, who were always on the short end of the stick in the Middle Ages. So it was really the life of the priests, of the perfecti, rather than the teachings of the heretics, which was playing the key role here. The perfecti, the priests, lived such blameless lives and were so eager to be of assistance to others that they inspired very devoted followers. So the Cathar faith didn't remain restricted to the peasantry for that long, but spread up the medieval hierarchy to artisans like weavers and potters, writers and poets, merchants and business owners, and then up to members of the Catholic Church, clergy, and even nobility. So Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter, Marie de Champagne, were both associated with Cathars as sympathizers. The Cathars dressed very simply in dark robes with hoods or hats. They went barefoot. The men were unshaven with long beards. And they started to show up in small numbers in the 1140s in France. But by 1167, there were enough communities in the region that they had to have an assembly to set all kinds of rules and boundaries. And the Council of St. Felix in 1167 organized the Cathar communities into bishoprics, each with a presiding bishop who was responsible only to his own flock. There was no central authority like the Pope of Rome, and the council was provided over by a cleric named Nicitas, which firmly established that as the direct source of Catholicism. So to become a Cathar, one simply professed one's belief and received the consolamentum, a blessing and welcoming to the faith through the laying on of hands. But to become a perfecti, one completely renounced the world and went through a period of withdrawal and purification before taking office. And men and women were perfecti. This is very different than the Catholic Church. There were no official services or masses, as with the Catholic Church, but rather informal gatherings, which seem to have been in homes of the different adherents. And in southern France, where the Catholic Church never had a very strong hold, the Cathars lived and worked among the wider community and convened their gatherings without any concern. Elsewhere, they had to be more careful and hide their faith, and this practice gave birth to the most popular literary genre of the Middle Ages, the poetry of courtly love. So courtly love poetry, which the Cathars developed, the common theme is a beautiful woman who commands worship and service by a courteous, brave, and noble knight. And the literary motif of the damsel in distress, who must be rescued from this, comes from this genre. And the most famous author was the French poet, what is this? Chrétien de Troyes, whose patroness was Marie de Champagne. Chrétien is best known for creating some of the most famous elements of the legend of King Arthur in the Round Table, such as Lancelot's affair with Guinevere, the queen of Arthur, the quest for the Holy Grail, and is the first who called Arthur's court Camelot. So whether you knew it or not, that's where all this, Cathars created all of this. So the poems that they had involved a quest or some sort of struggle to find a lady who had been abducted or imprisoned. And the point was that women frequently played important roles in these stories, which is a reversal of earlier medieval literary motifs. They're the central characters who serve by men rather than minor figures and men's property. And most importantly, the poems celebrated romantic love, which was considered quite different from and far superior to marriage, because in marriage, the couple had no choice. The match was arranged by the parents, while one chose to engage in extramarital or premarital love affairs. you could see how the Catholic Church does not be a big fan of this. C.S. Lewis, who's a great scholar, points out that these themes today seem commonplace and far from surprising, but you have to go back into the 12th century in Provence and over in Languedoc and look at, for example, Bede's History or Beowulf, and those are just completely different than this courtly love poetry that the Cathars are spreading. And so the Catharism is felt to be the inspiration for these works. Remember, all the Cathars were butchered. There's no Cathars around. And the claims that they were the allegories of Cathar vision, the damsel in distress was the feminine principle of God, Sophia, who had been abducted by the Catholic Church, and the brave knight, who was the Cathar adherent, who loved, served, and was sworn to rescue her. So according to all of this, Catharism spread as widely and quickly as it did through the troubadours who traveled through France performing these works. So whether the poetry was religious allegory, helping spread the faith, or whether the Cathars simply provided a better alternative to the corrupt and power-hungry medieval church, by the end of the 12th century, Catharism was winning more adherents than ever, and the Pope had sent legates to southern France to try and win the heretics back to Catholic orthodoxy. And there had been a variety of councils, but nothing seemed to work. So in 1208, the Pope Innocent III sent the lawyer monk Pierre de Castelnau to southern France to get the aid of Raymond VI, the Count of Toulouse, to suppress this heresy. Now, Raymond was not only an adherent protector and supporter of the Cathars, but he was also a bishop in the order in Toulouse. So he refused to cooperate with Pierre de Castelnau and sent him away. And a little later, Castelnau was found murdered. So this led the Pope to call for a crusade. This is the first crusade. And he promised the nobles in the north of France that they could keep all the rich lands and all the booty that they would get after the Cathars had been killed and their supporters were crushed. And since the northern nobles were all broke, they were only too happy to comply. And this led to the crusade. Now, the majority of the Cathars were women, so it was mainly women and children who were massacred in this crusade. But many times they would simply burn down the whole town and kill everyone. The most classic of this was in Béziers, when Arnaud Amaury, who was a Cistercian monk who was commanding the Catholic Church forces, was asked by one of his soldiers how to tell the difference between a heretic and a Cathar believer. And he said, well, no problem, kill them all. The Lord knows who are his. And with that, they butchered everybody. So according to church documents, if you can believe this, they said 20,000 heretics were slaughtered in and around Béziers, and the town was burned to the ground. After this, and then the sack of Carcassonne, Carcassonne today, if you go there, you'll see a humongous fortress there that was built in the wars between the Catholics and Protestants in the Reformation. But after, it didn't have the walls then. So it was a key town, but Carcassonne was sacked, and the Earl de Montfort led this crusade, which continued to go through the entire region and just butcher everybody in sight. And they declared the official crusade over, but there were still Cathars here and there, and the Inquisition kept finding them. And so they decided to continue just butchering people, sacking villages, murdering whoever they found. And so we go clear up to 1243 and 1244, and we find that there's a Cathar stronghold of Montségur, which held against the siege. It's on top of a mountain. It's looked to be impregnable, but they simply starved them. And when the town fell, there were 200 perfecti that were actually burned alive in a big pyre outside the town. So this is after the crusade is over. They're still going after it for this many years. So that is what happens when you end up messing with the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages.
Because they're such good Christians.
Yep. So now we're going to go over to, where did the thing go? Here we go. We're going to just wrap up the section with, we touched on before Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which was the book that propelled him to great renown. One of the problems that this had, if you think it's a problem, was that the hero was always male. And so Campbell viewed the myth of a single man as the product of the human psyche. And this deals with Oedipal impulses and infant fears that are the subject of contemporary psychoanalytic study. And Campbell drew connections between modern dreams and ancient myths, sharing a common symbology and representing the insistent meaning and making of the human mind. So the prologue always begins exploring the spectrum of tragedy and comedy in some sort of myth, the role of heroes and gods, and the ultimate source of power in the universe as represented in myth, which Campbell calls the world navel. So what we're trying to do here is redress this. This is dealing with men. And so there's another book out, The Heroine with 1,001 Faces, which is clearly a direct takeoff on Campbell. And in this book,
The only myth that he recognized really was the Oedipal myth. The only myth that Freud recognized was Jung worked with all of them, and even his contemporaries at the time that he had trained worked with all kinds of fairy tales, and that was a big difference between Jung and Freud. Also was the question of the feminine, the divine feminine, and women and girls and stories having their own developmental path, which Freud never saw. And Campbell was tending to subscribe more to a Freudian school of thought.
right. Yeah, it wasn't that Jung didn't pay attention to these Oedipal side of things, but the fairy tale side, it was very intriguing, or the astrological side. But it was a much broader view than what Freud had. So this book just runs through one after another, from Greek mythology, from Scheherazade, going even up to the Game of Thrones and the Queen's Gambit. So women are the ones that are always the heroines here, and they drive everything. But the difference is that they're embracing empathy, compassion, care, and often social justice. And so a female version of the trickster archetype in Everdeen and Salander is identified in this book, which is, they're just trying to be contemporary. But the most interesting traits, not traditionally associated with women characters, is a huge appetite. These are heroines, so they need to chow down a lot, and so it goes. So that ends the section on the, pretty sure, yeah, it does, on the eternal feminine. And now we're going to go. Okay, here we go.
Well,
Oops.
are there any comments or reflections or questions or input?
I do have a question. And this is a question without any input from me in terms of having any position on the matter. I just wonder, in terms of Campbell, especially, but others as well, whether this tendency to, in the case of hero heroine, to deal with the hero essentially, I wonder whether that is purposefully excluding women, or whether it is part of just the commonplace paradigm of just in the language, mankind. It's now, it moves to humankind kind of thing, but the male has always been the focus, but I have no knowledge whatsoever whether or not that focus is for the purposeful exclusion of women, or rather trying to encompass all of humankind in the male.
So you got to go back to the Greek. There's two things you brought up that are really pertinent. One is who wrote the story, who was telling. Well, they weren't writing the stories, they were telling the stories. They were storytellers, because writing wasn't very popular up until the printing press in the 16th century. The other thing is, you really have to, going back to the source, you really have to go back to the Greek, where there is no male and female pronouns. And or actually there's three things. The third thing is going back to the cavemen, to the Stone Age. The men, for the most part, were the ones who were out hunting, and the women were staying home with the kids. So there's an African proverb about the tale of the hunt, that as long as the tale of the hunt is told by the hunter, then the hunter shall remain courageous and victorious.
Right. Yeah, I think, Steve, what we're trying to correct this imbalance you're talking about is, you'll see, like the Cathars, many of the perfectae were women. The next thing we're gonna do is the Eleusinian mysteries, and again, the key people there, the priests, are women, not men.
I took some classes at Sarah Lawrence, by the way, where Joseph Campbell taught for quite a while. And I asked them if they felt that it was true that he was sexist and anti-Semitic. And Sarah Lawrence was mainly, for many years, it was a women's school, girls' school. Then it became co-ed. And they said, yes, absolutely, he was. And it was a mostly Jewish girls' school. A lot of girls from my hometown, Brooklyn Heights, went there. I took classes in my 20s. It was a really interesting class on Dante, but it was like, kind of sacrilegious for me to write about his use of astrological symbolism, which it's rife with. I went through he didn't have this, but later editions had these very elaborate indices. I just went through the index, and found the terms there, and I documented the whole thing. It was really dismissed as me imposing, some external artificial view. It didn't have the intellectual rigor I felt that the school has the reputation for. I think if I had done it, I was told, by other people that it was definitely a publishable concept. So I was pretty disappointed, but yeah. He was sexist and anti-Semitic. And it's just, I think there are a lot of wonderful things about him and his work. And he did a lot to popularize a lot of ideas. But my mother said he was far from unique in his time frame in the 50s and 60s. for example, he never even got a bachelor's degree. There were all kinds of people making the same kinds of points at Brooklyn College when my mother was going there in the 40s and 50s. And there are a lot of myths and stories concerning female characters. Their development is different. It's more inner and it's less linear. It's less about conquering the environment. It's more about conquering your inner self, your impulses. It's more about becoming mature in terms of things like forbearance. It's not about exerting your will out into the environment. It's like learning self-control and and compassion and responsibility for others. There's a Jungian who wrote one, which if we did a whole class on this, we could have a great time. But she wrote a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves in the 90s, talking about fairy tales and myths that are really presenting a different image of feminine energy from a lot of feminists refer to the Virgin Mary as a eunuch goddess because she's so diminutive and disempowered. Whereas like a mother lioness or a mother wolf is not diminutive. You mess with her pups or her cubs, she's going to be fierce. They're more fierce than the males, really. And they actually do most of the hunting. And the males actually do a lot of babysitting, while the females are out hunting. So there is a lot to be said about the different points of view and styles, but that could be a course in itself. But there are a lot of myths and a lot of fairy tales and so on about feminine development, which is different. It's very distinctly different from male development.
You look at healthcare, doctors tend to treat symptoms. They want to fix things where the women, the healers, they want to take a holistic approach, and heal the whole person. And of course, the women tend to be nurses. Unfortunately, the way our present healthcare system values things, the doctors are seen as money makers for the hospitals, for the healthcare systems, and the nurses, they don't get paid for nursing. They get paid for the doctor's work, but the nurses aren't valued as highly as the doctors.
And they might send everybody home. Well, that would be good. But on that point, the original healers, most cultures and the shamans were women, and it was then with the advent of patriarchy that they became, really kind of hunted as witches, and their knowledge was suppressed, which was about herbs, and the male model was kind of enforced, which was about patented substances that are isolates of the herbal substances. So they don't work as well, so they sell more. And you can patent these isolated constituents of the herbs. That's what drugs are, They all come from, aspirin is, I forget what plant it comes from. But yes, I agree with you completely, Bud.
Aspirin is salicylin from the silex from the willow tree.
Right, exactly.
I have I have a question regarding Campbell, the calling him sexist and anti-Semitic. Was the sexism a matter of omission of the female story, or was there more to it? And how was the anti-Semitism manifested?
I think it showed up even from what I gathered from staff at Sarah Lawrence, was even in the way he treated his students. That he tended to be condescending and dismissive toward them when it was a girls' school. Well, then he shouldn't have been there. But they felt he was too prestigious to dismiss.
Yeah, I did see an interview with Joseph Campbell where he was asked about why aren't there women, and he actually took affront at that. He said, "Well, look at all these great men, these great archetypes that we have. Why in the world would you want women?" Yeah.
Well, and they're kind of included anyway. And he didn't think there was anything to be said in Judaism. He completely discounted the mysticism and Kabbalah. And he just said it was a war god, that's all.
If you look at, I can only speak from a Christian perspective, but going back to the Apostle Paul, you notice that the women didn't even, all they read was the Gospels. They didn't read any of Paul's letters because Paul and Peter were sexist. And then, when the Council of Nicaea, when the good old boys took over the Catholic Church, they declared war on women.
Right.
Right.
And specifically Mary Magdalene, and painted her as, the whore of Babylon. And that's why the book of Pistis Sophia and the suppressed
Gnostic Gospels.
Yeah, the Gnostic Gospels, which they tried to sort of brush aside as apocrypha, but they were calculatedly suppressed. They were selected out, for very specific patriarchal reasons that didn't really have to do with the teachings of Jesus, or I would say, or the apostles. And it's not, I don't think it's necessarily integral to Christianity. It's more the Roman system that was put in place by Rome.
Yeah. So now what we're going to deal with is something we touched on last year. We're going to go into more detail here. There's a town called Eleusis, which is 13 miles from Athens. And every year, the elite, the creme de la creme of Athens, would walk this 13 miles over to Eleusis, and they'd go through a couple days of spending time there and then return. And what they did there, they could not share with anybody under pain of death. So that's why they're called mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries. On the left-hand side, we've just got something that was apparently taken from the temple that was there at Eleusis. And on the right-hand side, we have some mushrooms that are hallucinogenic. Okay, so you'll get an idea of that's where we're going with this as we get into this thing some more. So it's interesting that there's a huge amount of literature that has come out in this, but it's only been, say, since 1978. Okay, a lot of this has simply been suppressed, but with the internet and with everything else, it's now becoming, accessible. So the book that I keyed on is the book right in the middle here by this Brian Mirakeski, and it's called The Immortality Key, dealing with these Eleusinian mysteries. Now, he spent a lot of time personally as a trained scholar. He's fluent in classical Greek, in Sanskrit, in Latin, and on. And so he actually visited the Vatican numerous times and dug out information that you just couldn't get by over the internet out of the Vatican archives and so forth. And then he personally visited areas in Greece, in Germany, and France, and Spain, and Italy, and so forth to put together all of this. Now, he keys on this one book here, The Road to Eleusis, which is on the left. Now, this book was written in 1978 by three individuals. One was a chemist, one was an archaeologist, and the third one, Carl Rook, was a classical scholar at Boston University. He was actually head of the classics department there at Boston University. And the nature of the book was to suggest that when people went to Eleusis, the reason why they had a chemist was they had actually gone and looked at various items that were there at Eleusis, and there are various little chalices and so forth. But they hold very small, just a couple tablespoons of something to drink. And it's not like it's a big chalice for a lot of wine or a lot of beer. It's just a little itty bitty chalice. And so they did scrapings out of this, and the chemist was able to determine, yeah, this was hallucinogenic. That was what was going on there. And that's why people went to Eleusis, was to experience this hallucinogenic mystery that was happening there. And the archaeologist was the one that was, confirmed that, yeah, this was real stuff. This was not fake, just put there by somebody. But the bulk of the work was done by Carl Rook. So the book came out in 1978, and Carl Rook was at Boston University. Boston University had a president named John Silber. And John Silber was one of these people who sleeps well at night. There's no need to worry about shades of gray for him. It's very clear. There's black and there's white. That's the way the world works. So when he read this book and he saw that Carl Rook had written this, he met with Carl Rook and he said, well, the Greeks would never do this. Where did you come up with this trash? So he stripped him of being head of the classics department at Boston University, but Carl Rook was tenured. He couldn't get rid of him, but he made it so that Carl Rook could not teach any graduate classes whatsoever at Boston University. He could only teach undergraduate classes, and he had no political power whatsoever. So Carl Rook didn't give a flying jump of the lake about this, and he spent till today. He wrote, I have 8 books here that he wrote, okay? Because he had time on his hands. He didn't have to deal with graduate students and theses and so forth. So he wrote all of these books. You can see what they're about, mushrooms, myth, and Mithras, okay? And on and on. So he just documented this thing 87 ways, and so it goes. So we'll come back to him as we get into this. There's always a story in these things. So what in the world? Yeah, go ahead.
Friend of mine thinks that that the whole story about the snake, and I love Karl Barth. Karl Barth's answer. Karl Barth was asked by a student, if a snake could speak, and Karl Barth said, it's not whether or not the snake could speak; it's what he said.
Right.
And a friend of mine believes that when man first fell out of the tree and couldn't climb back up again, one of the first things that they grabbed a hold of was mushrooms.
Right.
And that was the apple.
Right. Yep.
I would say, I have it here, just it came up a little bit early. This is a pomegranate, but that's really what was in the Garden of Eden. And that the serpent represented Kundalini, and that Eve was actually initiating Adam into this kind of a mystery. And that's what the apple / pomegranate was all about. and the caduceus is a symbol of Kundalini. And that's really a large part of what all the mysteries were about.
Yeah. So the Eleusinian mysteries, these were initiations every year. There was this cult of Demeter and Persephone, and it took place at Eleusis, but it was only 13 miles from Athens. So basically people would all get together and walk the 13 miles over to the sanctuary, and they'd be there for a couple of days, and then they'd all get together and walk back, and they would be singing and chanting and on and on. So the basis for this, the claim is that there's some sort of old agrarian cult, and that they were derived from religious practices of the Mycenaean period. What we're going to see here, where we're leading in this thing, is actually, this appears to go back to Göbekli Tepe, that what we talked about, the oldest, call it religious site that anyone has discovered so far, which was in 11,000 BC, so 13,000 years ago. The site there had a religious ceremony that was every year, but there was no village there. There was no one lived there. They just went there to celebrate, and apparently the celebrations were hallucinogenic. So they got their money's worth. So where did this all come from? Okay, there was the myth of the abduction of Persephone from her mother Demeter by Hades, who was the king of the underworld. So there's a cycle that takes place here. There's a descent or a loss of Persephone from her mother. Her mother searches and then succeeds in ascending, having Persephone come back to her mother. And so we go through this cycle again and again. And it was a major festival, especially during the golden age of Athens, okay? But it spread elsewhere throughout the Mediterranean. There were 2 Greek colonies in Spain and one in Italy nearby Rome. This was before Rome. This was done in 500 BC, 600 BC. So these were little mini Eleusis sites that shared these things.
And the root of the word Minoan, by the way, that's the era of the age of Taurus that we were talking about before.
Right.
And the symbol of the shifting of the ages from Taurus to Aries is shown in the story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur, who was entrapped there by the Daedalus, the magician Daedalus, who had fashioned the wings out of wax, and they melted in the sun and all that. He made the labyrinth that entrapped the Minotaur and Theseus. So this is another one of these cycles. But they say in earlier tellings of these stories, like even the story of Penelope, she wasn't just weaving while she was waiting for Ulysses to come home. She was the goddess of fate. She was weaving his destiny. It was in later patriarchal versions, they removed that power from her, and she was just like passing the time while he was gone weaving this tapestry. But so it's kind of esoteric now that the tapestry was the story of his journey, that she was, he was co-creating it with her, you could say, but she was partly responsible for it. So all of that is just like, this is what is underlying it from the Minoan culture.
Right. So the
real quick, so that's also the seasons, you know, the descent into Hades is the winter and the ascent is
Right.
spring and summer.
It's an explanation, right? That's what the myth folks would say. It's an explanation of the seasons.
Right. The rebirth of Persephone is always in the spring, which is at at the end of winter when we have the rebirth of all of the nature around you. And what also goes with it is there was some notion of a reward in this afterlife. Persephone went to Hades and then came back. She was rewarded. And there's lots of paintings and pieces of pottery all over the place that depict aspects of these mysteries, but they never really get down to the, what's the real mystery there, and why in the world these ceremonies here at Eleusis apparently lasted over 2,000 years. 2,000 years is no small, span of time. The fact that people kept coming back, what in the world was it? And the belief was what they encountered there was psychedelic drugs. So we just go back and expand on this. There's a Homeric hymn, and in the hymn, Persephone was assigned the task of painting all the flowers on earth. But before she was finished doing this, Hades, the god of the underworld, showed up and took her down to his underworld kingdom. And Demeter could not find her daughter anywhere. She didn't think of looking in Hades. And so finally, Zeus got involved, and he decided he could see that Persephone was in Hades. And in order to make Zeus pay attention, Demeter caused an incredible drought. So people were suffering and starved and on. And so Zeus relented and allowed Persephone to return to her mother, to leave Hades. But as with all things, there's a hook. And during all this time with Demeter traveling all over the place and all these adventures, she taught the secrets of agriculture to this other entity. But finally, when she's reunited with her daughter, and the earth is now coming into bloom, it's now spring going into summer, all is good. The problem was a rule of the fates is if you consume food or drink in the underworld, then you're forced to spend eternity there. And that's what happened with Persephone. Hades tricked her into eating a pomegranate seed. One story is 6, one story is 4 seeds, and you can see the seeds here. And this therefore forced her to return to the underworld, not forever, but just for some months every year. So that's the winter. 1 month per seed was the rule, and the rest of the time she lived above the ground with her mother. So this is the cycle that we've seen here again and again, and that's behind the where did we go here? But this is just kind of the latest cycle here. This is what the Greeks put together, and it's probably much older than that. It probably honestly goes back to Göbekli Tepe. So this that we're talking about here is, maybe from up to 400 AD. So go back to 1600, 2000 BC, way before, Athens and Sparta and all of the Greek city-states came into their own. But these mysteries, these rites took place every spring, and the common thing was the agrarian cult. So what's probably going on here, what people have pieced together is the following: is that there was the going back in time, like when Göbekli Tepe was there, you really had just hunter-gatherers, but they were very knowledgeable on all of the surrounding plants all around them, and in particular things like mushrooms or homeopathic medical remedies that were there from different plants and herbs.
Well, they
And-
may have been natural, but they couldn't have been homeopathic.
Right, they were natural, I agree. So the point of it was that before they got around to actually sitting around as farmers, they could just harvest these things. And what would they do with it? Well, probably the most likely thing they did was they'd make beer. But this is a different sort of beer than anything we would think of as beer. They'd be,
Grains.
using fruits of all sorts and so forth. And the grain, and the problem is that now this led to the grain having a fungus on it. Okay, and the nature of the fungus was that could create these hallucinogens. So that was what they discovered. Before there was agriculture, there was beer. And of course, what followed that was, then if we could make beer, let's make wine. So they went there, and then, oh, by the way, we could probably harvest all of these grains and make bread and other things that we could go eat. But first and foremost was, let's have a beer with a little kick to it, a little hallucinogen that'll just push us over the edge. And this led to the thing that the mysteries here that people had when they were taking this stuff. This would elevate you above the human sphere into the divine realms, and you'd be assured your redemption by becoming a god. And this would be the notion of immortality. Many of the people that drank this stuff, and these are the elite of Athens that went to this thing. They had no fear of death after this. They were completely blown away, and if they died, they would have, call it out-of-body experiences, whatever. But it was so powerful that it left an incredible impression on them for the rest of their life.
Well, it's happening in a cave, with no light, with torches burning and drums, and it was deliberately created to be a really intense experience, this initiation. Plus the hallucinogenic drug, but you're also doing it in a group that's part of a very established ritual. It's a rite of passage. It's an initiation. And I think there was probably some sex magic, involved in deflowering the virgins of both sexes by the priest class, which is why I think there's so much trouble in the Catholic Church at this point. It goes way, way back. And it might have been a codified, proper thing to do at one point, and it's still just kind of in the DNA of the church, I think.
One of the things to keep in mind, just remember when I went through, elementary school, grade high school, etc. We were just taught, these Greek gods. So there's Zeus, and he throws his thunderbolt, and there's Mercury, and he's a very fast messenger, and there's Athena, and on and on. And these gods were had these powers, and they were very very human-like. They had all kinds of quarrels and fought over all kinds of things with each other. Well, basically that might all be true. I don't know if it's true, but it's basically what was fed to the masses of people there in Athens and Sparta, etc. That's what they were taught, was this is what's going on with religion. But the real religion was for the elite, and that was the Eleusinian mysteries. And that's where they would go here and have these incredible visions. They called them visions. And this would take them just to another level. And this was the elite of Athens
Where's
that were
that
doing
list of
this.
all the famous Greeks?
Yeah, but you're going to see it in a second. But so it's continued probably for thousands of years. That's one of the reasons that you should think of this as a religion with no name. Okay, that what we'll see is Christianity co-opted a lot of this stuff. The Last Supper could very well have been a hallucinogenic Last Supper. You might as well go out in style. The thing at Eleusis was that they kept talking about the goddesses as well as the gods. Okay, and so Persephone and Demeter were both highly put up there. So women are on the same level as men, and they just continually played off this cycle of descent, the search, and the ascent here again and again. So how in the world did this thing work? At the beginning of the feast, the priest filled two special vessels and then dumped one toward the west and the other toward the east. And people were looking both to the sky and to the earth, and they had a rhyme that in Greek was rain and conceive, have rain come down and conceive. And so in a ritual, a child was initiated from the hearth, which was the divine fire. And the name appears in Mycenaean inscriptions, but it was the ritual of the divine child, who originally was this Plutos god. And this is all connected with this other agricultural god, Triptolemus. And the goddess of nature, who survived in the mysteries, uttered the words, "Mighty Potnia bore a great son." So Potnia is a Mycenaean title that applied to goddesses. And this is the high point of the celebration was cutting an ear of grain, but it's cut in silence. So this represented the force of new life. So all of these things are things that are, placed out there. These are the things that were shared with people. This doesn't really get down to the mystery here of drinking something that's hallucinogenic. That was secret, and so it goes. So there's a lesser mystery, which was held in the spring every year, and then that's when it's called the month of flowers, and the greater mysteries were held once a year, and but they were held in the fall, and every fourth year they were celebrated with a splendor in what was known as the Pentetras. So the lesser mysteries were probably done in February, which was the start of spring in Greece, and the initiates couldn't come to the fall greater mystery in the same year. They had to wait the following year till September. And there is, in fact, this hymn, this Homeric age hymn to Demeter. And this led to King Celius having been one of the first people to learn the secret rites and mysteries, and was one of the original priests. He was a male, but there were other, most of them were female. And so this became more and more popular, and it became not simply for Athens, but for all of the Greek city-states. People came. And then finally in 300 BC, after this had been going on since 1500 BC, 2000 BC, there were two families that took this over, and this led to a real increase. Now, in the same time frame, around 500 to 600 BC, there were two Greek colonies set up in Spain, and there was also in the same time frame a Greek colony set up in Italy, close to Rome, but not near Rome, around, again, 500, 600 BC. So Rome was still just one of many little city-states there. And these places also had their own mysteries. They attracted people there. So they grabbed people from all over the rest of that end of the Mediterranean. The only requirements for doing this were you had to be free from blood guilt, which meant that if you'd committed murder, you couldn't go to the mysteries, and you couldn't be a barbarian. A definition of a barbarian is someone who can't speak Greek. So even slaves were allowed to go through this thing. It was open to everybody. You had to swear a vow of secrecy. If you divulged the secrets, you would actually, you could be murdered for that. That's how serious this was. So there were 4 categories of people here. They're priests, they're priestesses, and they're hierophants. Then there's the initiates that are going through the ceremony for the first time. Then there's those who had already participated at least once. Then those that had attained epoptia, those that learned the secrets of the great mysteries of Demeter. So those are the 4 categories. Only the priests and hierophants and the epoptia were the ones that really knew the secrets of how to do this. Now, they ended up with 6 categories of priests as a result. There was a male priest, there was a high female priestess, and then men and women down here doing all kinds of things. So you could see there's a veritable army here. But there were really only at most, like the temple only held typically 3,000 people. So it was really the elite of Athens that went to this. It wasn't large numbers of people. And having said that, there was still lots of priests and priestesses and acolytes there. So now we go to, when does this one go? So the lesser mysteries signify the miseries of the soul while in subjection to the body. So those of the greater mysteries obscurely intimated by mystic and splendid visions, the happiness of the soul here and hereafter, when purified from all the defilements of material nature and elevated to the realms of intellectual, spiritual vision. So Plato actually went to the Eleusis and did this. And he came back and said the ultimate design of the mysteries was to lead us back to the principles from which we descended, a perfect enjoyment of intellectual, spiritual good. The lesser mysteries, which took place in the spring, February, even March, you'd have to do a sacrifice and so forth to get to these things. So now we're just going to focus on the greater mystery, which is the one in the fall, typically September, October, and this took 10 days. So this is really the key one where they're going through a lot of these special things. And so it goes 10 days. It starts on the 14th of this month, and then it'll go to the 23rd to give us a total of 10 days. So first you bring these sacred objects, then there's a gathering of everybody to declare the start. There's initiates that end up starting out from Athens now on the 16th. So remember, this thing starts on the 14th, but everyone's going to walk from Athens on the 16th, and they're going to wash themselves in the sea along the way. And then on the 17th, they actually begin this festival for this god who is there. And so there's a little festival within a festival that they had here. And there's a big procession as always. And then we get to the 18th, and there's the people have actually walked over there, and they're swinging all these branches and singing songs and so forth. And they decide they have to, as part of the shout obscenities, commemorated an old woman who by cracking dirty jokes had made Demeter smile as she mourned the loss of her daughter. This is, I guess, Greek humor. And they had an epitaph for Dionysus, or a separate one for Iacchus, who was the son of Persephone. So there they are. Finally, they get there, and there's an all-night vigil where they're commemorating Demeter's search for Persephone. And then they get the special drink, kikion. This is the thing that it says it's made of barley and pennyroyal, but the barley is the thing that can end up with this special fungus called ergo. And the fungus contains psychedelic alkaloids similar to LSD. So they're going to get quite a trip out of this. They go through this, and we're now up to the 19th, and people are going through all on this big acid trip. So I've fasted, I've drunk the kikion, and I've taken from the box and put things back into this open basket. And again, there was a cycle here. There were things done, which is a dramatic reenactment of the Demeter Persephone myth. There are things shown, where they displayed sacred objects, where the Hierophant played an essential role. And then there are things said, which are the commentaries that accompanied all of this. And so all of these things were combined together, and they were into things called the unrepeatables. So the penalty for divulging any of this was death. So we end up with the climax to this whole thing. Some hold that the priests were the ones who revealed the visions of the Holy Night. Others said that doesn't account for the power and the longevity of the mysteries, lasting for literally, tens of thousands of years. And these experiences must have been internal, and they must have been due to this kikion, this hallucinogen, is what people believe. And then there was some incredible dancing and merriment. They sacrificed a bull late one night or early some morning. So now we're up with the 22nd, and finally on the 23rd, everybody starts to walk back to Athens. So this is where all the activity has been over the last, since 1978. As I mentioned, Karl Rook was blackballed by the president of Boston University for even bringing this thing up. But now it's actually, after all this time, attained academic stature. It's worth studying, and it's something that appears to have a lot of merit to it. The problem you face with all these things is that there is always limited evidence in these things. You're trying to concatenate together a bunch of different ideas, and this may or may not be what's going on, but this appears to be, at this point in time, the most plausible theory, that the initiates were sensitized by their fast and all of the ceremonies that were going on here, and then they have this jolt of this hallucinogenic potion, and so now they're open to all kinds of profound spiritual and intellectual ramifications, and the opposition to this is really that people look for any solid evidence. Well, the evidence is now coming out. People, by getting hold of these little chalices that were only holding a couple of tablespoons of whatever the liquid was, they could do scrapings off this, even though it's thousands of years ago. and chemically analyze it, and it appears to be that it was indeed hallucinogenic, is what people were drinking, and they didn't need a lot of it to get, to get a real jolt. The Athenian aristocrat Alcibiades was condemned here in part because someone in Athens actually had a private house, and they tried this out at that house, and that's going against what happened at the Eleusis. So that was a no-no, and I don't think he got killed, but he was into big trouble doing this.
Why does it do that?
I don't know.
Let me try to go here.
Yeah, she's there.
Yeah, it got lost.
Yeah, no problem.
Welcome
So-
back.
So
Thank you.
here we go. So there's lots of different hallucinogenic substances out there. The most likely one is this ergo, which is this parasite, this fungus that comes with barley or rye. But it's a mixture of a number of hallucinogens, but then there's many others, and the chemistry is non-trivial, but that's really what the priests seemed to know how to do, was how to get this fungus and prepare it so that you would have this drink. The thing to take away from this is the following, that this is very big picture now. And again, this is speculation, but it appears that, again, if you're a hunter-gatherer, say in 10,000 BC by Göbekli Tepe, and you're going through your stuff, but you're gathering, for example, there is barley running around, and you can look for this fungus on it and use the fungus to create your hallucinogen. And then you go to Göbekli Tepe, and probably once a year, probably in the spring, and you have a big celebration to kick off the season. And some people are going to remain hunter-gatherers, and some are going to start to spend more time farming. And in particular, they'll be growing barley and rye and wheat and so forth. And then this phenomenon would spread. So the way that we know it spreads is there's one basic Indo-European language group here, which weaves together kind of everything. Most of the languages in Europe, and even those over in the Indian subcontinent and Iran. So this shows that there was a common tree, and that as people spread out, the tree of languages spread. There were more and more variations. So we have English and French and Portuguese and Russian and Danish and Dutch and Spanish, all of these things going to the west. But if we go to the east, that what we'll find here is Albanian, Armenian, Slavic, Celtic, Germanic, Hellenic, Indo-Iranian, and Italic, and so forth. And the same thing happened here. Going to the west, they apparently dealt with mushrooms and this fungus. Here in the east, the Hindus deal with soma, is the drink. And then, of course, in the Americas, there were mushrooms, and there's this ayahuasca or ayahuasca drink that you take, and you have these incredible visions.
Or cactuses in Latin America.
Right. And I'm sure there's something in Australia. And so the true elite here in Greece went to Eleusis. So this was Plato, it was Sophocles, Anaximander, it was Socrates, the creme de la creme of Greece. The same thing was true for Rome. Augustus Caesar, as emperor, went to Eleusis. Hadrian, who made the wall as emperor in in Scotland and England. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic, actually went to Eleusis. And then there were these, as I mentioned, 2 Greek colonies in Spain and 1 in Italy, where they had their own separate ceremonies. Okay. There's intimations here that the early Christian parishes spiked their wine with this kukion or kikion, this hallucinogen, which is one way to get converts. If people say, well, you want to see what happens when you believe in your Lord Jesus Christ, here, drink this, and you'll have one trip, and you'll see what you'll end up with. No fear of death. It'll be a life-changing experience, and you'll be an incredible convert to Christianity. Now, all of this changed for whatever reason, starting around 392 AD in the Christian era. And the Roman Empire at that point decided to persecute the pagans, that the Christianity was now strong enough that they were going to just wipe out any opposition that they had. This, for example, the Catholic bishop in Alexandria led a mob to go burn down the library in Alexandria. So there were hundreds of thousands of scrolls there. People believe we might have at most 1% of them left. We have no idea what's lost. There were literally thousands, tens of thousands of shrines all over the Roman Empire that were destroyed, including the one at Eleusis. Okay, Eleusis was just destroyed by the Catholic Church, and everything was quiet. And then we get way up into modern times now. In the 1950s, these Eleusinian mysteries resurfaced. One of the people, the chemist that I mentioned, had put together this book on the mysteries of Eleusis. The chemist actually in 1955 synthesized LSD, and he wrote an article for Life magazine in 1957 when Life magazine had a subscriber base of 10 million people. So all of a sudden, millions of people were being exposed to the notion of hallucinogens and Eleusis and on and on. And I mentioned the same guy went on in 1978 to the chemist with an archaeologist and with Carl Rook at Boston University to write this book. And now Rook has done a huge amount of work on all of this stuff. And we have the story of Adam and Eve, as Marjorie pointed out, points to the apple, or it might be the pomegranate seed of Persephone. And the takeaway here should be, well, it's the tree of knowledge, the tree of good and evil. So we should eat the apple. Okay, that's the takeaway in this.
That's the initiation
to everything, to good and to evil. The Last Supper might have been a real acid trip, if you want to go out in style.
And it might have made something happen that mimicked death for Jesus.
Yeah.
So that he was pronounced dead, but then actually did get up and walk out of the crypt.
Sure.
Maybe he never being dead.
One of the things that happened along the way was it was easier to do beer. So beer was done first, and the beer was spiked. But then over time, people were able to make wine, which had by itself higher alcohol content, but they would spike this also. And so probably where Jesus of Nazareth was from was great wine country. They could grow grapes there. And so they migrated from beer to wine. And so it goes. So this is the religion with no name, the Eleusinian mysteries. And many people think that this was the origin. of things. They found archaeological evidence now because we can do things like Neanderthals going back into the ice ages, 100,000 years ago. The Neanderthals in Europe, they found evidence of hallucinogens when they cleaned out their teeth, looked at the teeth scrapings. There they found food, but they also found these LSD-like hallucinogens. So this is not a new thing. This has been with us for forever, and could be the real basis for how organized religion got started. So with that,
It certainly seems like you can see, origins in the ritual that still show in the mass, the Catholic mass today.
yeah, every day, the Catholic mass, you have bread and wine, and the wine, is celebrating this Last Supper, which could have been a trip. So it goes.
And the mystery of death and resurrection. And I think a lot of the basic mysteries were about the mystery of sex and procreation. For a long time, they didn't understand that the two were connected.
And then the notion of resurrection or reincarnation,
Right.
that came with this. So these are all things that these are things that have been, as I said, suppressed, since 392, and just now are
We
coming
had
back.
such a day today. We couldn't get to scan this, but you can see that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a dodecahedron, which is a pentagon that makes up 12 faces.
Which is a shape in sacred geometry. And it's said that pomegranate seeds, well, when you take a circle and you surround it by 6 circles of the same size, well, 6 will fit around 1 circle perfectly. And that's said to represent the 7 days of the week and the 7 classical planets, which includes the sun and the moon. And pomegranate seed is a sphere that's been compressed. And when that happens, the sphere develops these facets that are, when it's all perfect, when it's from every angle equally. And this is something that guy Darcy Thompson wrote about a great deal. The bees making their hives are not making them hexagonal. The tubes that they create collapse into hexagons when the pressure is equal on all sides in the honeycomb. So that's where this shape comes from, that the ancients celebrated as a 12-sided figure. And that's what happens with pomegranate seeds. When you compress them, they become these like faceted little jewels.
Yeah, I took a look and I didn't see any dodecahedrons. So
We can't swear to that here. I can hardly see, so I'm taking Bart's word for it. But what it
I
doesn't
saw some
look like-
squares, no pentagons.
It's old, but it's supposed to
If
be.
we had a
really
fresh
good.
one, we might do better, right?
Right. But anyway, the ancients knew a lot about all of these things. This is a wonderful book that Cheryl just sent us. She sent us this wonderful, neat kind of Christmas gift of old books that she had that she didn't need anymore. This is going to be backwards, right?
It's a quadrivium, these 4 subjects.
The classical liberal arts of number, geometry, music, and cosmology.
That's all you need to know. You'll be well educated.
And it's just full of these patterns of everything that it just said, mathematics showing up in everything, in nature, and that's what I liked about Darcy Thompson, was that he was saying, well, it's just necessity that makes it so. It's not necessarily that the bees are measuring the angles with little protractors, of their honeycomb, making it, hexagonal. It's that the weight of the wax itself will collapse into a hexagonal tube from being a cylinder, because it's a circle surrounded by 6 circles will flatten, if there's enough
it needs
weight
the-
and
it's-
pressure.
Yeah, it
It's
has
just
to,
by necessity. It can't, the mathematics of it, it can't be anything else.
yeah, or it has to equalize the stresses and strains everywhere. And a sphere, a round tube will not do that. A hexagon does a much better job of handling all the different forces that you
Right.
deal with there.
So he saw everything as an interplay of forces and materials, and so whether it was the bones in a bird's leg or, whatever it was, things are the way they have to be. It's really an interesting view of evolution.
So,
So that God doesn't have to be there, like I said, with a slide rule and a protractor, planning it all out. Nature just kind of, gravity being what it is, weight being what it is, it has to be the way that it turns out that it is. It's a really interesting concept.
right. So we're done for tonight. Next time will be another adventure. Any questions on anything? We'll distribute everything to everybody.
Well, I learned that if you're going to fight a mammoth, you might as well have a buzz on.
Well, I asked Bruce about this, and Bruce, what did Namshal Rinpoche say? About, oh, you're muted.
About taking drugs?
Yeah,
Oh, he said you should have those kind of experiences without a drug.
Mhm.
yeah. I think the drugs are an unnecessary crutch, but for a lot of people,
It's a shortcut, I
Yeah.
think, that can give you a taste. But
Yeah.
they say the experiences that the yogis have who practice day in, day out for hours and hours at a time, or the priests, are just as far out, but you get more insight. They're more informative, they're more meaningful, maybe that's the word. There's more
Yeah.
meaning.
Well, the other things is if they arise naturally, they're more integrated with your rest
Right.
of your mind and so on. Whereas if
You
they're
understand more,
what?
I think. I would think you would understand more.
yeah,
Well,
but
you'd understand more, but well, first of all, they become more reliable. And if they're produced by drugs, they're bound to be distorted to some extent, no matter what.
Right.
Whereas if you-
it's interesting that the Aleutian mysteries that everyone that went there said it was a life-changing experience, and that they had no fear of death, that they had incredible visions, that they don't regret doing it for 1 second. No one was negative about what they went through, which I find hard to believe, given what I've seen people do on bad acid trips. So,
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but they miss out a realization of the nature of consciousness and some of the real deeper things like compassion and
Right.
some of the things that come out of when you do all the hard work.
right. It's incomplete.
Yeah, it can't be complete.
Right.
I think they worked to give it a context. The priests and priestesses kind of staging the whole thing. it was usually in a darkened cave with paintings on the walls or an underground sanctuary. They were working to codify it, so it wasn't just like a drug experience. It was a codified religious experience.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there must have been some other motivation, because what came out of it was just more delusion.
Right.
Whereas if you look at the Eastern religions, you have considerable insight into the nature of the mind and reality, and it's all good stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And it bears up. We're showing, I hope, giving a taste of it anyway, that it bears, modern physics is confirming what the ancient mystics were saying without microscopes or telescopes or spectrographs, looking at the energy of the stars, and you can date things like the age of the solar system and so on with these spectrographs showing the radiation and the stages of the decay, right? So, but the modern science is confirming what the ancient mystics have been saying for millennia,
Right.
without the same instruments. So how are they doing it? So
Yeah.
maybe these drug experiences were like a shortcut. And I think shamans in just about every culture indulge in that, and share it with their patients or their subjects, or their students in some way, to introduce a reality that is not necessarily evident to the naked eye.
But look what came out of it, though. If you look at the Eastern approach to the mind, and this they talk about fantastic things in terms of Zen and Taoism. So what came out of the drugs? Nothing.
Yeah, and plus you were going to be killed if you talked about what was going on. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of
the church came out of it. What do you mean?
a lot of good parties came out of the drug.
Yeah, right. That's why they kept it secret.
right.
There would be no Timothy Leary.
Yeah. So, okay. I wish everybody Happy New Year. And
Speaking of,
we will
drive
we'll
safely.
reconvene next week and in our saga. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. New year.
Okay. Night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Take care. We love you.
Bye-bye.
Love you too.